Okay, well, I'm going to kick off with the slides today. So thank you for that introduction. I think it's fair to say that for Fran and I, the last 5 years has been a whirlwind of green infrastructure in the city centre, which has been really fabulous. So just to give you a very, very brief sort of overview, which Pete, you kindly did do. Basically, the Council and Natural Resources Wales have been working together alongside the lead experts in Green Infrastructure, the Green Infrastructure Consultancy, on the development of the city centre green infrastructure strategy. What we really wanted to do was to ensure that we enhance the quality and the variety of green infrastructure in Swansea City Centre. It was a real, we wanted to identify all those opportunities around technologies and techniques to enhance green infrastructure, to influence strategic investment in green infrastructure in the city, and to provide guidance around what a tool that we could use that would be simple and reliable to assess green infrastructure. So that's what we set out with wanting the strategy to do. It's been a really exciting cross-sector, cross-disciplinary way of working. And unlike other green infrastructure strategies, we took a really co-productive approach, and we considered engagement a really important part of writing the strategy. I'm going to hand over to Fran, who's now going to run through our conclusions.
Yeah, we always do a bit of a comedy double act, really, and that's partly because it speaks to the sort of, I don't know, authenticity of our partnership in the way that both Swansea Council and NRW work on this, which is quite unusual in itself. So conclusions, I'm not going to labour the point. You can all read a slide in front of you. We always start with our conclusions first, just in case anyone drops off by the end. And really, you know, if you can think of one question, one thing that you can take away from this is when you go outside and you look at a bit of urban greening today, ask what it does, because it should be doing at least 3 things, really. You know, if we think about ecosystem services and all those are kind of other things that we're all familiar with. So it should be doing lots of things. It should be very busy, should our nature. And that's just a take-home message, really.
Okay, so this slide is all about legislation. As you will all know, we have got some really, really useful, strong legislation here in Wales. So rather than go through the legislation, sort of the plethora of national and local regional legislation is up there for you. And I guess what I would really like to focus on is the fact that and when we were writing the city centre green infrastructure strategy, we were really driven by the fact that we had a once in a generation opportunity because of the regeneration work that was going on in Swansea. And we saw this as a huge opportunity, which is why we started with the city centre strategy. What we're actually doing right now is writing a wider county-wide strategy, which will encompass the whole of the county. And so there sort of was normally you'd start with the county first and then do the city afterwards, but because of that opportunity for the city centre, we switched it round. And once the county-wide strategy has been published, the city centre strategy will form a chapter in it.
Okay, so this is always a bit controversial when you're talking about strategies, and some of you will have seen this before. So I famously am not a huge fan of strategies in the public sector. We have an awful lot of them that cost a phenomenal amount of money and resources to deliver, and they're often revisited when we come to make a new strategy, and little has been done to deliver them. So we were sort of really keen to make sure that our strategy, we were putting our energy in the right place. And I think the statement that Peter Drucker is quoted as saying here, culture eats strategy for breakfast, that's not to say strategy is not important, because it absolutely is, but a strong organizational culture is a surer route to success. And I think, you know, the point for us as a project team is that we really needed to make sure we were putting that our energy, our time, our resources, and, you know, that's a lot of energy and time and resources, ultimately funding to achieve our aim to ensure that we enhanced the quality of GI across development in the Swansea City Centre, because if not, you know, what's the point, right? And I think, you know, one of the really important things for us was how we as a core team developed our values, our ideas, our behaviours, our own kind of steering group around the strategy and development, our own culture, and that was really, really, really important. And the strategy provides us with a brilliant hook to change cultural behaviours, but it doesn't do this alone as a document. It is just a piece of paper or an electronic document. And so we really wanted to share ideas, empower people, you know, and we created a bit of an informal network, didn't we, through all of our engagement that we did. And looking back at the start of our journey, you know, that the ways of working from the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act became our, you know, we lived and breathed those ways of working, didn't we? And that kind of became our absolute mantra for the way we did things. And we were really lucky that we used that as part of our procurement process to bring in the Green Infrastructure Consultancy, because we recognised that we weren't GI experts back in 2019, and we had so much to learn. So we brought in that expertise, and they worked with us rather than just for us, and that was quite an unusual thing. So that was really, really, really positive.
Can I just jump in there and say, well, Fran says that she was not a fan of strategy. As one of the council's policy officers, I knew how important strategy had to be. So it was that relationship between definitely having strategy that actually delivers something, rather than the disgruntled strategy that gets written and then just stuck on a shelf for the next 5 years.
And I think that's it, isn't it? Everybody said we needed a strategy, but I think I call it public sector bingo. We often hear strategies, working groups, action plans, but we just need a little less talk and a little bit more action sometimes, to quote Elvis Presley, to move on to our community engagement. So, well, this is about our engagement anyway. This is a whistle-stop tour, because we know that we talked about this back in 2020, I think, to the GI Forum. So some of you will be familiar with this, and we want to talk about what it led to, but we realised for some people we need to give a bit of the context. So we didn't write anything until we completed our engagement. And that's unusual, because usually people write something and then they go out to consult. And we didn't want to consult, because the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act tells us not to consult. It tells us to involve, and that's very, very different. So we worked with Urban Foundry, and we ran workshops with professionals, so that's decision makers, businesses, and we scheduled meetings, and we were just really available to meet and have conversations with everybody on their terms, because this was new to them. And I think, one of the interesting unintended consequences working with Urban Foundry in this way during this, they were an urban regeneration consultancy, and they got really interested in urban greening as part of some of the things they've done. So they've sort of run off and become a bit of a GI expert themselves, really. So we did street-based community conversations where we asked people what nature in their city was to them. And we got some incredible feedback. And we spent time in the city centre talking to, I think, was it 630 people?
It was.
Face-to-face over a few weeks in the summer. So we went to the places where people were. I think there's a really common thing in the public sector. We need to learn lessons from, if we put up a poster and expect people to attend a meeting, why would they? So interacting with people where they are was really, really crucial to getting those conversations. And we had clear messages from the electorate, which we were able to feed back to the politicians around the barriers to implementation from decision makers across the public sector. So that included governance, so staff feeling they were not allowed or empowered to do it. Knowledge, skills and training. You can't ask or assess something if you don't know what it is. Maintenance, so the lack of understanding what the maintenance regimes were, and it's often used as a way of closing the conversation around GI. But we recognise still that maintenance is a bit of a wicked issue. So our engagement process told us that our citizens and visitors wanted a greener city with less hard surfaces, instead providing space for wildlife and bringing people joy. And I think never underestimate joy. It's hard to put into a GDP context, but really when people are talking about hanging out in a city centre that's comfortable, they're talking about spending time, and then they spend money. So there is a whole economic argument around some of this stuff.
Can I just also jump in and add another thing we did do, which we often forget, is as part of that engagement process, we ran a couple of training sessions with all the members. We invited all the members from the council to attend, and NRW senior management as well. And that really gave them the chance to hear directly from our consultants exactly what green infrastructure was about. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to jump on to the themes there. So what you can see there are the four main themes that came out of this engagement work that we sort of managed to create into these word clouds. So there was a theme around well-being, which is all around how people's emotional response to nature in the city was. There was a very strong theme around loss, which is what has been removed, diseased or not there, and what people felt strongly about. Which is the square one. There was a lot of conversation around what's physically there, which is the butterfly size. By the way, and well-being was the top heart. So the butterfly one is around what people sort of saw and what they connected to physically. And then the opportunities is the speech bubble, which is what people saw as opportunities of what could happen. We also had a strong theme around Castle Square, which is a very emotive space in Swansea city centre, which has had different has appeared in different ways over the years, and that became a topic within its own right. But what this gave us was that really strong sort of remit, really, in which we could write our vision and our strategic objectives.
I just can't find my button to go to the next one. Right, Penny, this is another you.
This is another me. Right, okay. So with this slide, I won't sort of dwell on this slide, but what you can see really are two main targets that came out of the work that we gathered from the engagement with all of the different people and professionals we engaged with. So really they sort of focused on increasing green infrastructure, increasing canopy cover, and increasing biodiversity, though we didn't have a target for biodiversity because at the time we didn't have a baseline of our existing biodiversity in the space in terms of species, etc. And what we then also had were our strategic principles. And this is really the most important part of the strategy, are these 5 principles of green infrastructure. And basically anybody who designs anything in the city centre, vegetates anything in the city centre, or maintains buildings really needs to follow these principles. And that is something that we have subsequently really sort of pushed when we're talking about the strategy with our networks.
Yeah, and we did actually take this back out to the community and back out to all of our societal partners when coming up with this. It's not that we just involved them once. We then went out and talked about what you said. This is what we've done. Let's sense check that. We also found that during this process, developers were coming to us to talk to us about the document. And we actually also developed a green space factor tool, which is a really simple way of measuring green infrastructure. And we actually had people using the document, developers using the document before we'd even completed it, which was a really good way of testing it. Yeah, we did. That was a great opportunity, really. And just to hammer the point home that I made a little bit earlier about around multifunctionality. So we're talking about urban cooling, clean water, it's health and well-being. This is comfort for people. And really interestingly, I stumbled upon a post on Facebook where some people were a bit upset about some trees that have been chopped down in Forest Park shopping centre or shopping area, and really, really lovely and succinctly put. I've quoted someone as saying, "Nice. Now there's no shady place to sit." And that actually, as we think about climate resilience, that becomes a huge issue for our dwell time, for our economics around people spending time in a space. So there's I don't think we're often particularly good at linking in that economic argument around GI. I think we often talk about all the other stuff. But when our politicians and our decision makers around regeneration programs are, they're thinking about how we can get people in and spending money. This slide just touches upon language. So we didn't ask anybody in the community about green infrastructure. And there will be people who do know about green infrastructure, but there's a lot of people who don't. So another term that's quite nice, and this is quite friendly, this is by the Waits Enterprise Trust, the Waits Family Enterprise Trust, nature-based neighbourhoods. And this kind of brings into play a kind of nice view of those interconnected, the multifunctionality, the spending time, access to play, valuing it. And there's a really nice bit up at the bottom about stewardship. And this is where places where people and nature and the economy can thrive together. But I just want to be clear on that last sentence, if you look at the very bottom of it. So stewardship, this doesn't mean that community or its volunteers are free labor. And I think we need to be really, really clear on that, because we often hear volunteers will deliver this and it'll all be fine. Gardening is a skilled profession and we need to invest in that. Community stewardship is what we're talking about. So feeling that they can do things within their space. They can pull out a lovelier if they want to, or they can ask people to move on if they're doing something antisocial in their space, those kind of things. So
before you move on, could you click on hide on that pop-up box? Because that was during part of the last slide.
Right, okay.
Thanks.
We're going to do this really quickly because we want to get on to the good bits. We've got about 5 minutes left. Yeah, go for it.
Right, okay, so just some of our key learning. I'm going to be super quick here, but have loads and loads of conversations. Never underestimate the value of conversations with everybody. Ask good questions. There's no such thing as a bad question. Make sure you ask really good ones because you get good, useful answers. Learn each other's language. Don't stand on your hilltop and shout and ask everybody to join you. Give it time time is really important, and genuine meaningful engagement is so much more beneficial than sort of consultation, the old-fashioned sort of consultation we tend to do in the public sector. Work with experts. And I think it's really important to feel you can make an argument for working with experts with a good track record, and it can be political. You need to speak to everybody.
So key challenges, is it bling or is it the real thing? So in Swansea now, so really interestingly, going back to this, these are all Swansea pictures. When we first started out in 2019, all of the pictures in our presentations were of other places, and now we've got our own examples. So is it bling or is it the real thing? And that's around quality, and that's where our 5 principles have really helped push the quality elements, because if it's not meeting those 5 principles, then why are we doing it? And the knowledge, skills and training. So we've been working really closely with, again, Urban Foundry, who've really pushed forward with training. They used Community Renewal Fund initially in partnership with NRW and Swansea Council. And then subsequently they've used Shared Prosperity to do something similar. So they've, held events, organised massive things, and a Green the City festival, which was really great. So we did all of that. So what's that led to? Let's have a look at some of our actual projects now that have come forward. So Sponge City, we are working towards becoming a Sponge City in Swansea. And that is driven by Natural Resources Wales interest in Swansea Bay as an opportunity catchment for the Water Framework Directive. So we're looking at how we manage our urban landscape to hold on to water and slow it down and use it and then lose it and clean it. Another interesting point that we made right at the very beginning, if you remember, one of our objectives was to enhance funding programs and schemes and strategic funding. So Regeneration Swansea is the partnership in Swansea. It's a huge multi-partnership. I think it's representation from 26 organisations now, found my notes. And that's across the private, public and third sectors. And we took our GI sort of roadshow workshop to the partnership, which I sit on behalf of NRW. And, they got really excited about it. The Welsh Government, employees, staff from the Regeneration team got really excited about it. And the next iteration of funding, so at the time it was Targeted Regeneration Investment Fund, snappy. And now it's Transforming Towns. Now, Transforming Towns actually has a thematic where you can solely fund green infrastructure on a development in the targeted areas for up to 250k. So that's a huge result. And we've used that to fund a lot. So this is an example of a very new green roof, because you can see it's not very green, it's mostly brown. And it's looking pretty good at the moment. And it's, by next year, it'll be really well established, but it is very new. So this is, what do you want to talk about this one then?
So this was the pop-up parks. As we said, there's a lot of regeneration going on in the city centre, and we saw that as an opportunity. And we had this site here, which is due to be a development site. So we basically, they wanted it to be available to the public in the short term, so not to do a lot of work on it. So we came up with the idea of putting a pop-up park in, which is something that can be moved. And here is pictures of the pop-up park. So it was quite barren before that. So we've got a series of planters, and we've got 2 green roof bike shelters. And the purpose of this was not only to talk about problems with the nature and climate emergencies, which we've done for interpretation, but we also brought some natural habitats that we get in Swansea, so calcareous grasslands, meadowlands, etc. We brought them in these planters, and we sort of celebrated our natural biodiversity and thought about what that could look like in a public space, which normally is dominated by sort of Victoriana or very low maintenance planting.
This is the roof. There's 2 sides to this roof, actually. There's a bit of a offices in the middle, and this is now Beacon, was coastal housing, now Beacon Cymru social housing landlords, and they wanted to transform their rooftop. Obviously their intention was to green it, because they put plastic grass there originally, and their director for development at the time, Gareth, he was really keen to see if they could green it and have a green roof. So we worked with them, and they got funding from Welsh Government to deliver a biodiverse, extensive and intensive green roof. And it looks really good now.
It's really pretty.
It's quite amazing. And staff use it. There's seating areas. There's, on both sides. Right, this one, I will jump in on this one. So this is, it's just an orange wall. This is actually Urban Foundry's courtyard at their headquarters, and where their cafe Urban Kitchen is. They were really interested in, could they do anything from a sort of sustainable drainage point of view, and the sort of philosophy around SUDS of slowing water down and using nature to do it. So we worked with them to install these rain planters, which have done really well, haven't they? I mean, they've been really, really well. There was a lot of challenges with this project. Whilst they look very simple, these are listed buildings, and cutting a drain pipe on a listed building is a challenge. So we've had a real experience on that one. But in terms of, you know, slowing the flow down, and when you come here when it's raining and we know how much water's coming down that downpipe, there's actually still a tiny, tiny trickle coming out the other end. So they attenuate and slow down an awful lot more than I really thought they would. But yeah, people like them. They're nice. Do you want to do Potter's Wheel?
So Potter's Wheel, again, funded by money from central government, back about sort of 4 years ago now, is an intensive green roof. So it was a very boring building. It's obviously still commercial at the bottom, and you've got housing at the top owned by Pobble. And what we've got now is a beautiful intensive green walls, sorry, not green roof, which obviously has really changed the focus and the look of that whole building, obviously with some improvements as well to the facade. And it's a really sort of like, it's one on the gateway parts coming into the city centre. So it's really nice to have it there on the roundabout.
It's becoming part of a green quarter, really.
It is,
an informal green quarter, because 7172 Kingsway is next to it with an intensive rooftop garden and the Byford Living building, which I'm sure you've all heard about. Well, I'll talk about it in a minute anyway. But that's just next door as well. And that building's actually bookended with green walls. So Burrows Road, this is in Sandfields in Swansea. That is Oystermouth Road on the other side of this dead end. And we worked really closely together with Robert Bray Associates to deliver the first bioretention rain garden in Swansea. Bioretention rain gardens are different from other rain gardens in the sense they're about cleaning, tackling pollution and capturing pollution. So this is what it looked like when it was first put in. But because I didn't want to faff around with the bubble, I've actually got some better pictures of it now that planting's much more established. So that's this year. That's a month ago.
That was March this year, and then the previous slide was when it was first installed last July.
Yeah. So it's done really, really well. The community are really happy with it. I think, in hindsight, the lesson for us is we should have put some interpretation with it so people understood what it did. But we're now working on another scheme further up this road and around St Helens Primary School, which hopefully will tackle that. Do this one.
Okay, so very quickly, Swansea Environment Centre has for a long time sort of been a central point for environmental issues in Swansea, and they were very quick early on in pioneering green infrastructure. So on this building, this is what it looked like quite a while ago now, and this is what it looks like now. There's a green roof on it. There's a green wall. You can see a metal in aluminium planters, and then we've also got an at-grade green wall going along the bottom, which obviously needed a bit of negotiations with our highways team. But again, when we all work together, these are the sort of things we can do. This scheme, along with some of our other schemes, was actually funded by Local Places for Nature money, which comes through the council. And I'll jump on this one as well. Again, also funded by Local Places for Nature money. This is an example of where you can make quite a small change. So we had a lot of bins around this part of town, from commercial properties over the road, trying to look at ways that we could store them. So we've got some, so we've tidied up the area by putting the greens and the bins and some bin shelters which have green roofs on them.
Yeah, and I think going back to the bins, we've learned a lot about how we do it.
Yes.
And you went back to the people who delivered it, because they said it was Green Roof Organisation compliant with their code of practice. NRW is a member of the Green Roof Organisation, so is Swansea Council. And really, they said it was growth compliant, and it wasn't. We went out with our rulers. So I think one of the things we have really learned through this journey is going out and checking things, checking it's right, and then pushing back when it's not. So Woolworths, for anyone who's familiar with the old Woolworths building on Swansea's Oxford Street, it is now being built into this. So that we should have a more updated picture, really, but it's in construction. So the green roofs haven't been completed, but the glass house and things are there. So it's pretty impressive. So this was a really pioneering building for a retrofit. So they've retained the carcass of the Woolworths building, so they weren't using more embodied carbon. We weren't demolishing it and then rebuilding it. And then they put stories of, I think it's 8 stories on top.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly. For residential. And this is social housing, so it's managed by Pobble, and Haser Developments are doing the development. But this is an outstanding opportunity for us to demonstrate what you can really do in terms of bringing some buildings back into use. So all of the balconies have their own planters, and there's going to be a certain amount of engagement with the people coming into those units and those properties around what they can plant and how they can be supported to do it. It's a really exciting opportunity, and we're looking at a project at the moment with universities to study all of this stuff. So that's quite an exciting watch this space.
That particular project as well got a really high green space factor scoring because of the way that they've included greenery on vertically and horizontally around the building.
And they were a great opportunity. They were a great example of their architects came to some of our early workshops and said, we know you haven't finished the strategy, but we want to align our development with it. Can we just have it? So we just gave it to them in draft format, said it was draft. It was covered in spelling mistakes, maybe written by 2 dyslexics. We just weren't precious. And they aligned to it really quickly. And so we were able to kind of come through in sync, which was great. Quick one on
so again, this is just outside Swansea train station, another local for places for nature scheme, just really looking at how you can create space for nature in quite hard areas. Obviously this one is maybe not capturing water in the same way that some of our other schemes do, but what this one is bringing biodiversity into a space and creating better dwell time outside the train station.
Okay, Wales' largest green roof. So it's not always thought of as a green roof. It is now known as the Amy Dilwyn Park, the coastal park next to the arena. It's actually on top of a car park, so it is a green roof. But it just is a really great demonstration of, you can have biodiverse, extensive green roofs that are just for nature, and then you can have a park on a rooftop too. So the world is your oyster when it comes to delivering some of this stuff. And yeah, it's been a really exciting project. And the side of it, we've got climbers going up, wisteria. There's some honeysuckle, I think. I can't remember what else.
Some ivy, all focusing on air pollution.
Yeah, all focusing on air pollution. It's next to Westmouth Road. So, come live, work and play in our nature city.
I think what I'd like to finish off by saying is that in the last 4 years, we've achieved an awful lot. And I sometimes think we don't stop and breathe and look at what we have done. I think what we have done is we've tried to address as many typologies as we can. We've tried to think about what's suitable for the space we're looking at. And we've been really, we've managed to invest with the Transforming Funds money alone. It's over £1 million has gone into green infrastructure in the city centre, which has been really, really phenomenal and really exciting. And there's a lot more in the pipeline.
There is.
So yeah, it's a fun place to be.
It is. It's very exciting. And I think I'm not going to labour the point on this one, but if you want to go and find out another good European example, the Ostenburg Eco City is a really good. You can just Google that, and you'll come up with that YouTube link. So I highly recommend that one as that was particularly around flooding and surface water flooding issues. So yeah, there you go. That's us. That's a wrap. How do I stop sharing?
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. It's really amazing to see what's going on in Swansea, and we're already getting stuff going up in the chat. John Briggs from Natural Resources Wales. Could you unmute and turn on your video and ask your question?
Hello. First of all, that was a really great presentation. Thank you. And I think the double act was really great as well. So definitely something to think about in the future. My question was, is there a spatial plan to go with your GI strategy? And the reason I ask is because it's important in GI to think about sort of wider connectivity than just looking at sort of isolated sites.
Okay, so so a couple of things there. Firstly, we had the Swansea Central Area Regeneration Framework, which was a document that was written by our capital projects team prior to the development of the strategy, and that actually identified the need for what they were calling a green archery through the city centre. So what we've got is the Swansea Centre is sort of surrounded by some designated spaces. So we've got Swansea Bay, which has got SSSIs on it. We've got a couple of wildlife corridors. So the whole point of that was about connectivity through the space. But I think what we did with the green infrastructure strategy is we recognise that, but we also recognise things like the city centre is in a flood zone. It's very close to the beach. We had a lot of surface water flooding going on. And obviously it was post-war construction. So it was very much focused on grey, hard surfacing. So we sort of pulled all those things in together. Now, looking forward to the county-wide strategy that we're writing now, this is even more complicated in some respects because we could use very much planning legislation for the city centre. But when we're looking at the wider county, you're looking at lots of different services and functions and agriculture, etc. So with this particular piece of work, we're also pulling in a wide range of strategies and legislation, green infrastructure statements, green infrastructure assessments through the local planning process. Luckily, we're also currently rewriting the local development plan for Swansea. So we're sort of aligning the two documents along the same lines. And we're also picking up a lot around our climate and adaptation, sort of net zero, carbon zero work, of which green infrastructure from the council's point of view and NRW's, but it's one of 8 themes of how we meet carbon zero and address climate adaptation. So what we've
also
done
got resilient ecological networks as well.
And we also have our, we do. And we're just sort of knitting all these things in together to make sure that we don't repeat, and we also build and avoid any unintentional negative consequences. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's great. That's sounds like a really well integrated sort of suite of different considerations you're looking at. So thank you.
We hope it will be. We haven't done it yet.
One thing that impresses me about what's happened in Swansea is the way that people just seem to have come on board, and you've explained a lot about how you didn't just present people with a fait accompli. You work with people to co-create this in the truest sense of the word. But a lot of these things have been done with co-creation, and then they become another doorstopper, I think, to prop up the wonky bookcase. What do you think is the most crucial thing that's caused people to actually pick up on things like your greening factor and to actually build this into their buildings?
I think it's that we continued to involve everybody after that. So we didn't just like, oh, we've got a strategy, job done, off we go, we'll do another project. We've continued. There is an action plan, an unofficially unadopted action plan, but it's an action plan nonetheless, which we work towards. And we continue to support everybody in our sort of journey. That's, we just had World Green Roof Day, where we just got everybody together to celebrate. Look, in 5 years, we've gone from 1 green roof to 10 in the city centre. That's huge. And I didn't really believe we would get that. And we've got 7 more in the pipeline that are going through funding and planning. So, we're just continuing, and we're finding we're still getting more wins, aren't we? Like, oh, someone contacted us about this. That's a win. Let's go and have a chat with you, and just keep on. It's the ongoing relationship, I think, really.
Yeah, and I think also what really came out, the sort of 3 things that came out from the professionals in particular, from the engagement work we did, was obviously around maintenance, around knowledge and skills, but around leadership. So I think we realized really early on that this couldn't just be public sector driven. It couldn't achieve if it was just public sector driven, which is why, for example, Urban Foundry have come on, sort of got really excited by it and are in a really good space to lead on sort of the training. What we haven't done is we haven't been precious about it. We've tried to share it out, because for me, the best legacy would be if I leave the council, if it continues, it doesn't rely on me to drive it. That would be really, really important. I think something else I'd also like to big up, because is the fact that when we had our event last week on green roofs, we had Chris Bridgman at the event, who I can't remember his exact title, but he's vice chair of the European Green Roof Federation or something like that. And he actually said that what was so important in what he liked so much about what we were doing in Swansea was the focus on quality. And I think, as Fran said, you need to communicate with people and for everybody to understand why you're trying to do what you're doing to really achieve quality. One of the big problems is that quite often when we develop schemes, we might be given sort of like the bronze option because it's the cheapest one. And if you're a client and you don't know a lot about green infrastructure, that might seem fine. You might be really happy with that. So we try and spread the word as much as possible, so we know that the clients and the building owners are getting what they want and the suppliers know what they want. And I think that whole ongoing sort of process of building a local economy is really, really important.
And can I just ask, is planning permission dependent upon getting a particular score on your greening factor tool?
So the greening factor itself and the strategy are not material considerations in the planning process, because they're strategies rather than supplementary planning guidance. However, we do give a target for residential buildings and non-residential buildings. And as a council, we have sort of committed an aspiration to meet those. It's harder with maybe developments that had started the planning process before the document, but we're seeing now that more of these developments have started post the document, which makes it easier because there's lots more information for people to use. So I think that's an important thing to consider. But again, that's why the communication is so important. If you're talking with people and everybody's sharing that aspiration themselves, then people will adopt the green space factor tool, and we know that they have done. I mean, obviously through funding you can specify.
So through funding, and again, that's where those principles have come in. And then planning officers, whilst it's not material, can say you could use the green space factor tool to demonstrate you've met these, and then they do the calculation and it demonstrates they've met them or they haven't, and they need to tweak something here, and actually it's because they put a cedar mat there and it's not going to